A Dark Peace by Dana Lee. Chapter 17. Daniel O'Neill was commanded to take an impossible hill of rock. Not rock, but boulders. The ancient, rotten teeth of the earth that seemed to him as Stonehenge had when he saw it on holiday with his family as a boy. The stones, massive Saracen giants, seemed monstrous entities themselves, not about to be assailed by some southern boys on horseback. He stared at them, utterly amazed. He imagined the Merlin to be hidden away beneath their caverns, Merlin in a never-ending barrage of bullets. "They call this Devil's Den, sir," a scout informed him. "I cannot ride my horse there." Puka rolled his eyes and nodded his magnificent head. He didn't have to, as they were slammed with an assault of mini-balls and shells just then. He rolled out from under his beloved beast, who was in throes of death and agony. His beautiful white hide was torn apart, covered in gore. Daniel cried out, attempting to free his friend. He reached for his pistol, only to fall back in horror at the sight of his arm, worthless, the same wounds as Puka, who kicked his legs one last time, attempting to rise side, and thankfully slipped under. Falling to the ground, he lay beside his horse. He laid there a long time. Hours had passed, and Daniel lost consciousness. A dark peace enveloped him. He pictured the girl with the auburn hair and her racing horses. He hoped she had gotten where she was going. Finally, two privates dressed in butternut found him, hoisted him on a sorry, blood-stained stretcher, and brought him to a tent in the woods. Still, he did not return to consciousness, for he was lost in a dream, hidden deep behind Saracen stone and a veil of smoke. Chapter 18. They came up from the cellar on the 4th of July, and it was raining. The light blinded their straining eyes. Lee would have liked to be blinded, for what lay in wait for them above ground was the shadow of death. At least 50 Union men lay scattered across the house. The walls, the rugs were soaked in blood. There were the wounded, the dying, and the dead. The smell hit them like a fist rising from the grave. The place was a fifth-act carnal scene. Bodies were strewn across the floors, tables, chairs, and everywhere. "Help them, please. Do what you can," commanded an officer who looked crazed and broken himself. Sarah began to scream and did not stop. Her voice joined with those of the dying in a hideous choir. Lee stepped boldly outside, and Shiner ran off barking. A little maniac escaped from prison. He knew his way home. She stumbled over to the barn to check on the horses. They had been left with plenty of hay, oats, and water. The floor of the barn was a mass of bodies laying upon bloody bales of hay, limbs ripped from them as if they were ants. Retching, she fell to the wet ground. She looked up, searching for the horses, and a dozen hands reached out to her in low moans and pleading cries. She could not find the Olsons' carriage, but she saw their own old cart. There was a soldier sitting in it. He paid no attention to her. He was writing something. She walked around and around, calling Fiona, who was hanging out by the shade of the trees. Back in the house, she pushed her way through, back down to the basement, where she hastily changed her dress and wrapped her valuables up in the dirty one tucked beneath her arm. She found Jenny, who was busy in the kitchen already with her mother-in-law. "Lee, we've got to help them." She looked at her incredulously. Mrs. Wood bounced Elizabeth on her knee. "Get the baby, Jenny. Come home with me." "I can't leave now. Besides, you are safe here. These are our boys. God knows what you are liable to find at home. That's why I have to see you, understand. You might get stopped along the way. I can't take that risk with Elizabeth." Ernest walked in from the outside. "I wouldn't worry too much about it." They've driven the rebels out. I'd say that's safe enough. There are always stragglers. They could be dangerous, Jenny corrected. This is no place for Elizabeth, was Lee's response. And what do you think you'll find on Baltimore Street? She had to see. She could not stay here in this hell on earth with its writhing corpses. She first coaxed the soldier out of her cart. Excuse me, sir, I hate to bother you, but that is my cart, and I'll be needing it now. He looked up at her from the book on his lap, his eyes black as pitch. He looked her up and down boldly, and she cast her eyes down and away. Stepping down out of the cart, he approached her, putting his grimy fingers on her clean blue sleeve. What's that you say, missy? If you'll excuse me, this is my cart. She attempted to pull away clumsily, calling to Fiona, who she had spotted. She could hear him laughing at her, but she did not care. It was a wonder to her that he could laugh at all, ever again. Hitching Fiona back up to the cart, she was overcome with revulsion. It was spattered in blood and gore. Through the wood she sped. The trees, too, fell casualty, bleeding from bullet wounds. Felled branches reached up to her, as the men had in the barn. Her stomach was a tight fist. That overpowering expectancy she had been feeling now reeled her head as the rain fell down through the forest. Chapter 19. As she drew in closer to home, she couldn't help but notice that impossibility. The stench of death got worse. It surrounded her and threatened to take her along with the best of them. This was no longer her home. Thousands upon thousands of soldiers now claimed it as their wasteland. It was the apocalypse. Fences lay in splinters. Children and livestock wandered around like zombies, and there were hundreds of piles of dead, festering horses. Flies infested the land as if the devil himself had laid out an elaborate buffet of rotting waste for their benefit. She was grateful for the rain. Pulling into the drive to the stable as she had done 1,000 times before, she noticed something odd. Michael had hung a small basket made from chicken wire from the clothesline, which they filled with stale bread for the birds. It was always swarming with them, sparrows, swallows, and wren, but they always flew away upon her approach. This time they didn't. She got down from the cart, tied Fiona to the post, and walked slowly towards the feeder. It was covered in birds, little gray wren, who looked at her, and slowly scattered to a neighboring dogwood as she got closer. One little wren stayed, till she was all but on the feeder herself. Then she flew to a branch and watched Lee with anxious black eyes, twittering and crying, hopping up and down. Lee had never experienced such a thing before. Although she saw these birds every day, they never let her get close. Now she saw the cause of it. A wren had trapped his wing beneath the wire and couldn't get away. His beak was dappled in blood and his nose was snotty. Oh! Tenderly she removed him and was surprised at his weightlessness. Then he flew off to the branch, joining his worried mate. She went in the kitchen door, her bundle of clothes beneath her arm, her blue dress sopping, blood-stained and mud-spattered. She couldn't recall a time that she felt more wretched. Miss McBride was cooking as if in a frenzy, not thinking, just going about her routine fast forward. She hadn't even noticed her come in. Her usually immaculate apron was stained and unmentionable. The floor that was always swept and spotless was covered in mud and clumps of trampled grass. Miss McBride, oh, there you are, my lass. Where's Daddy? Miss McBride pulled out a chair for her and they sat. Lee was preparing herself for more horror. He's all right. He's burying the dead. Mrs. Thorne is pregnant. Her husband is in Virginia, so he's helping her. Lee, this house, is full of dying men. 3 died here yesterday, thankfully. They were rebels. There are 2 boys from New York in the parlor. Are you listening to me? 4 from New Jersey in the living room. 1 on the dining room table. A lad from Boston is in your father's bed. 2 from Ohio and 1 from Vermont are in the boys' rooms. I didn't want these other ones, the rebels. Look what they've done. 1 from Georgia is in my own bed. I'm sorry to say it, but the one in your room is from Louisiana of all places. I told him absolutely not. I told your father too, but it's like falling on deaf ears. I told him, isn't it enough they've killed your son, stole the harvest, stole the chickens, and with all of our good lads still laying in wait out there in the fields for help, dying in the rain they are, drowning in the rain in their own blood for want of shelter? He only reminded me that they were Irish, and that a good woman from Virginia had taken in your brother and gave him a peaceful death. He's even taken a liking to them, I believe. Mind you, they are no trouble. They're dying, all of them. All we can do is ease their pain, help them along. I would say that those two rebels have the best chance of survival. Don't think I haven't considered murdering them myself. A little bit too much laudanum, perhaps, mixed into a hot toddy. But they are not worth the damage to my immortal soul. They haven't the will to live, let alone make the long walk home. Cavalry they are, the two of them. Both have lost their horses. Horsemen without horses are hardly men at all. I saw that with my own father back in Ireland, after the English had taken his horses. Anyways, I leave those two for last. I need your help, but you stay away from those two. You leave the rebels to me. Lee nibbled at some bread, hot off the iron. Lord, you'd take bread off a dying man. I haven't eaten much. The Derhoffers' place is worse. I suppose you should have stayed, but your father was concerned for your virtue, and so was I. You're all right, aren't you? She looked her up and down with her speculative little eyes. They haven't touched you, have they? No, I'm fine. Good. Wash up then first. Here's a tub. Watch, that's hot. Soak that dress in it when you've finished. Where should I go? Take the lantern down to the cellar. That's the only place they haven't claimed yet. Chapter 20. The boy in the parlor was already dead by the time Lee got to him. He lay there hanging over the settee with a wool blanket held tight in his dead hands up to his chin. His mouth was open as if he was trying to tell her something, but his eyes were closed. She tried not to notice how young and handsome he was, as it broke her heart. They never knew his name, only that he was from New York, as the other one, stretched across the floor, had said. He was now moved to the ruined settee and given broth, bread, and water. He was called Jack. He wasn't nearly so handsome as the dead one. Jack was missing a leg from the knee down. His face was gored from a bayonet. She felt guilt for her noticeable disgust towards him. He wished he could die. The 4 Jersey boys in the living room did not speak to her, as they were thankfully sleeping. Their hands were crossed over their chests, their bodies wrapped in dirty blankets. They seemed peaceful. She went into the dining room and thought she might never eat again. There, splayed across the pine wood table, was a bloodied, tortured thing. He had ants running across his face, a horrible picnic. He kicked his feet, having no hands to swat the insects away. She ran back to the kitchen for a rag to wash his face. The one in the parlor is dead, she told Miss McBrien. The old woman crossed herself. Lord, they'll be replacing him with another. You don't mean it. Child, have you seen the church? The church was just up the street from them. Men line the pews. There are amputated limbs lying all over the front steps. Oh, God. Yes, now get thee going. Give us some help. Help me get that dead boy out of this house. Oh, God. Then cover the mirrors, or his soul will stay lingering. Jack had not touched his food. He watched helpless as the 2 women dragged the boy in the blanket out of the room and left him lying on the front porch. He thought of a vacancy sign. It's a dead man's party. Leave your body at the door. Will you wash the one in the dining room? He has ants on his face. I haven't the stomach for it. All right, get upstairs to those others. She went upstairs with the tray, and her legs felt weak. Her knees buckled, and she stood with a pounding heart outside her own door to her room. It was still and quiet, the first sign of peace she had in days. Silently she cracked the door and peered in. The window was open and rain splashed in on the sill. The man in her bed was long, his legs hung over. His boots lay forgotten on the floor at the foot of the bed. There was something on her nightstand she couldn't quite make out, and something glinted even in the poor light from beneath the bed. Then something extraordinary happened. He turned his head, looked at her, and smiled. She was struck, standing there stupidly for what seemed to be forever. His smile did not falter or fade. She knew it was him, the first rebel she had seen on that first day, and ever so cautiously she tried to close the door again. Wait. She stopped and dropped her eyes away from him. Thank you for your hospitality, he said softly, and she thought she should melt. His voice was like sugar. She opened the door, entered the room, and closed it behind her. I have to cover the mirror. Do you think I'll die? I don't know. The boy downstairs did. Miss McBride is very superstitious. My granny was the same. She stood there looking at him, under her sheets, in his underthings. She was very embarrassed and felt her face go scarlet. I'm sorry, miss. If you'll excuse me, my name is Daniel O'Neill from New Orleans. Oh, I'm Lee. She rummaged through her chest and found a slip, which she hung over the mirror of her wardrobe. I thought I would die, maybe even wanted to, but I don't know now. She could see his arm. It was a mess, clotted, riddled with grape shot. I decided they couldn't have my arm. I guess it's not much use anymore. I have to go. I'm not supposed to be in here. This is your room, isn't it? Yes, but I knew it was. My dolls. There they lay, the three of them, next to him in the bed. He hadn't moved them. They lay there content, one happy family. No, the painting, masterfully done, if I might say. It was the first thing I saw when I awoke. Mrs. Olson's watercolor hung on the wall opposite the bed. I saw you the first day of battle driving the horses. Yes. You saw me too. She nodded. I'm so sorry to hear about your horse. He was a glorious thing. Thank you. Yes, he was. He covered me till the end. I thought I would die without him. How are yours? Mine? The horses. She noticed it was his hat on the nightstand. It no longer seemed so intimidating to her. It was dirty, and the plume she remembered was gone. Suddenly she was struck by what Miss McBride had said. These men were dying, all of them, so why did he seem so alive? His blue eyes were lit with that light that she used to see in her father's or brother's lively Irish eyes, only theirs had since gone dull. My horse Fiona is fine, but the others are gone. They belong to a friend of mine. You must be in a lot of pain. Doesn't seem so bad anymore. What have they done for you? They? The doctors. There aren't enough of them to go around. The army has very little supplies. They put me here, which was lucky enough. Hold on, I'll be right back, I promise. In the meanwhile, try to eat something if you can. Leaving the entire contents of the tray with him, bread, water, chicken soup, she went down the stairs to the kitchen and boiled some water on the stove. Luckily, Miss McBride must have still been busy with the others. She went back up to her room and this time locked the door behind her. He noticed. Setting the water tub on the bed, she rummaged through her chest again. She placed a bar of lavender soap she had made herself into the tub. Then she opened her closet and removed a bottle of cherry cordial from her hat box on the shelf. He had devoured the food from the tray, and she poured the cordial into the empty glass. Thank you, you are an angel. This was the best meal I've had in years. She noticed there wasn't a crumb on his beard or in her bed, but the sheets were bloodied from his arm. Well, then that's nothing. I'll do better next time. Here, you'll need this. Your arm needs cleaned and bandaged. I can't ask that of you. You don't have to. You first. You'll need it too. He handed the glass back to her. She hesitated at first, sipped at it, then handed it back to him. And so it went back and forth with the glass, till emptied and refilled again. She felt her face grow hot, and she felt his forehead, feeling his blood coursing to his temple. She didn't want to take her hand away, and when she finally did, he said, "Please don't." She put it back again.